Kathleen Hanna, and she's the wildly charismatic lead singer of the pioneering punk band Bikini Kill. So they've had this long night of heavy drinking, maybe a little bit of, situational vandalism, and they eventually stumble back to Cobain's cramped apartment.
As you do in your 20s, right?
Exactly. So Kathleen Hanna grabs a Sharpie marker and she writes a teasing inside joke directly onto his bedroom wall. Kurt smells like teen spirit. She was directly referencing his girlfriend at the time, Toby Vale, because Toby wore a very popular, heavily marketed grocery store deodorant brand, literally called Teen Spirit.
Yeah, it was everywhere back then.
Right, so the joke was incredibly literal that Cobain was physically marked with this highly commercialized gendered scent.
But see, the profound absurdity really kicks in when you realize Cobain's actual reaction.
Oh man, this is the best part.
It is, because Cobain, who proudly claimed he never wore deodorant at all, was entirely unaware that this specific consumer product even existed in the world.
He had
zero clue. So when he woke up hungover and saw that graffiti on his wall, he genuinely interpreted it as this brilliant, revolutionary anarchist manifesto.
That is just wow.
Yeah, he thought she was bestowing upon him the literal essence of a youth-led uprising. I mean, he thought it was poetry.
It perfectly foreshadows, honestly, the entire paradox of the song we're unpacking today. You have this fiercely independent underground punk artist who accidentally rates a massive corporate commodity, and the whole thing is based on a total misunderstanding about an actual corporate commodity. Welcome to Deep Cuts and Deep Thinking.
That accidental genesis on a bedroom wall really sets the philosophical stage for everything that follows in this deep dive.
It really does.
But what's fascinating is that if you move past the title and look at the actual sonic blueprint of the track itself, the whole accident idea just completely disappears.
Yeah, the music is anything but an accident.
Exactly. The music itself is a work of incredibly deliberate, calculated architecture. To understand how that specific regional angst translated into a global sound that completely rewired the music industry, we really have to look at the severe sociopolitical divide that birthed it.
Right, because you had these two very different worlds colliding in the Pacific Northwest, and Cobain was caught right in the middle of them.
Think about the geography for a second. On one side, you have Aberdeen, Washington, where Cobain actually grew up.
Which was not a booming town.
Not at all. It was not a thriving metropolis. It was characterized by this crushing blue-collar economic stagnation.
Yeah.
It was a collapsing logging town where it rained constantly, and that environment fostered a very hostile, aggressive, heavy metal and punk environment. It was, survivalist.
Totally.
But on the other side, just an hour or so away, you have Olympia, Washington, centered around Evergreen State College.
Which is like a whole different planet.
A completely different planet. Olympia was hyper-intellectual. It was this DIY, fiercely feminist, indie pop scene driven by a radical, almost academic rejection of corporate music.
I always think of Aberdeen as the raw, unrefined crude oil of this story, and Olympia as the refinery.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Aberdeen gave Cobain this visceral, deep-seated rage, but Olympia gave him the intellectual framework to kind of channel that raw anger into something with a distinct shape and purpose. And if you listen closely, you can actually hear that friction in the musicology of the track itself.
You hear it in the very first notes, honestly. The song is written in F natural minor, specifically utilizing what musicians call the Aeolian mode.
Okay, theory time.
Yeah, but without getting bogged down in theory, the Aeolian mode inherently carries this dark, melancholic tension. It naturally sounds like mourning or dread, unlike a bright, happy major scale.
Right, it feels heavy.
But the real engine driving the song is a 4-chord, syncopated power chord progression, moving from F to B flat to A flat to D flat. And what makes this progression so undeniably heavy is the use of what classical music calls parallel fifths.
Okay, pause right there. Parallel fifths. I hear that term thrown around in music documentaries all the time. But what does it actually physically mean for you, the listener, who was just feeling the music in their car?
That's a great question. In traditional, functional, classical harmony, parallel fifths are strictly avoided. Like, they are considered a mistake.
Really a mistake?
Yeah, because classical music wants independent musical voices weaving together. If you play parallel fifths, it's like two cars driving down a highway perfectly side by side, never changing lanes, never turning off.
Oh, wait.
It destroys independence and creates this massive, immovable, monolithic block of sound. Furthermore, this specific progression completely defies classical resolution. It lacks a traditional dominant to tonic cadence, meaning it never musically goes home or lands on a comfortable resting chord. It just generates a state of constant, unbearable harmonic tension.
So essentially, this chord progression is like an animal pacing back and forth in a cage.
Yes, exactly.
It has all this kinetic, aggressive energy, but it intentionally never resolves. It never gets to escape. It musically mimics the physical sensation of being trapped or anxious.
Which is so relatable.
Right. I have to imagine that's a huge part of why it resonated so hard with a listener who felt economically or socially trapped.
That feeling of psychological entrapment is absolutely baked into the harmonic structure. It's unavoidable. But, we also have to acknowledge that they didn't just invent this out of thin air. They systematically synthesized a few highly effective influences.
Like the Pixies.
Exactly. Cobain freely admitted he was basically trying to rip off the band The Pixies. He loved their extreme, quiet, loud, quiet, dynamic template.
Which is such a brilliant manipulative tool, honestly. By making the verse so incredibly quiet and sparse, It forces you, the listener, to lean in closer.
Right, you have to pay attention.
And then that makes the explosion of the chorus feel 10 times louder than it actually is.
That's exactly the mechanism at play. It gives the song its manic depressive cycle. But then there's the rhythm itself, which pulls from an entirely different genre altogether.
Oh, this is the part I love.
Yeah, listeners in 1991 instantly noted the structural resemblance to the syncopated hook of Boston's 1976 hit, More Than a Feeling.
Oh yeah, you can totally hear that.
But the most surprising stolen groove belongs to the drummer, Dave Grohl. He took that massive, iconic drum pattern directly from 1970s disco and funk groups.
Disco. From a punk band.
I know. He specifically cited the Gap Band as his primary influence for that beat. He essentially took a massive, hip-swinging funk pocket, and he played it with sheer hardcore punk velocity.
So you have this massive, syncopated funk beat played with terrifying punk aggression, wrapped in a melancholic, pacing chord progression. The immediate problem is, how do you capture that sheer physical violence on tape in a pristine Los Angeles recording studio without completely sanitizing it?
That was the puzzle facing producer Butch Vig when the band arrived at Sound City Studios in Van Nuys, California in May 1991.
Which is a legendary place.
Studio A at Sound City was legendary, not just for its massive live acoustic room, but for its custom 1960s Neve 8228 mixing console.
And analog boards like that are so coveted because of what they physically do to the electrical signal, right?
Right. They impart what we call analog warmth. Think of it like taking a harsh, jagged, overly sharp digital photograph and running it through a vintage film filter that subtly rounds off the sharp edges and makes the colors richer and more saturated.
Okay.
Vig wanted to capture the sheer physical power of the band's live performance, but with enough clarity so that it didn't just sound like a wall of mud.
Wait, I read they went to some pretty extreme, almost architectural lengths to get that specific drum sound. Like, they literally built a cardboard fort in a professional recording studio.
They sure did.
That sounds like a complete DIY nightmare. Did that actually work, or was Vig just humoring a punk band?
No, it worked brilliantly, and it was actually entirely Vig's design.
Oh, really?
Yeah. To capture the absolute low-end, chest-thumping punch of Dave Grohl's kick drum, Vig had to isolate it. If you just put a microphone in the room, it picks up the kick drum, but it also picks up all the crashing cymbals bleeding into the same mic, which ruins the clarity.
Because it just gets too messy.
Exactly. So Vig and his engineering team built a physical 8-foot tunnel out of old cardboard-based drum cases.
An 8-foot tunnel.
Yeah. They taped them all together, extending out from the front of the kick drum, and placed the microphone deep inside that tunnel. It acted as a physical barrier, completely isolating those low-end frequencies from the high-end cymbal crashes.
That is just incredible studio engineering. But Vig also had to play some serious psychological games with Cobain to get that massive guitar and vocal sound. Cobain was a devout punk purist.
Oh, fiercely pure.
Vig knew that to make the track sound huge, he needed Cobain to double track his lead vocals and his lead guitars.
And double tracking, for those unfamiliar, isn't just turning the volume up or copying and pasting a track. You have the singer perform the exact same part twice on 2 different tracks.
Okay.
Because no human being can sing the exact same waveform perfectly twice. Those microscopic variations in pitch and timing physically rub against each other. It creates a natural chorusing effect that makes one solitary voice sound like a massive choir. But Cobain totally resisted it.
Right, he called it a fake corporate pop trick.
He hated it at first.
So Vig, completely deadpan, casually points out that John Lennon, who is an absolute untouchable idol to Cobain, used the exact same double-tracking trick on Beatles records to make his voice sound fuller.
He played him perfectly.
And just like that, Cobain caved.
Masterclass artist management, truly. But the real studio friction, like the controversy that haunted the band for years, arrived after the tracking was actually done.
Right, the mix.
Geffen Records wanted this song to have a competitive commercial polish to ensure it could survive on radio, so they brought in engineer Andy Wallace to do the final mix on a highly sophisticated SSL console.
Oh boy.
Yeah, Wallace's mix was incredibly surgical, and it completely infuriated the band.
What did he actually do that made them so mad? Like, specifically?
Well, he used gated, triggered digital drum samples and sent them to a Lexicon digital reverb unit.
Okay, what does that mean in English?
Right, so imagine a literal electronic gate on the drum microphone. When Grohl hits the drum incredibly hard, the gate flies open for a fraction of a second, letting the sound through, and then instantly slams shut. This chops off any lingering echo or room noise. Because the sound is now perfectly isolated, Wallace could blend in artificial pristine digital drum samples and massive stadium echo from the Lexicon reverb unit.
So he was kind of faking it.
He wasn't replacing Grohl's acoustic drums entirely, but he was augmenting them with artificial perfection. This ensured that the massive low-end bass frequencies and the piercing lead guitars wouldn't just turn into a muddy mess on a cheap car stereo.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because Cobain later complained bitterly about this in the press. He said the polished mix sounded too much like a Motley Crue record, that it completely stripped them of their punk rock integrity.
He was very vocal about that.
But I have to challenge that narrative for a second. If Andy Wallace hadn't engineered those pristine bass and lead frequencies to pierce through the radio static, would the song's incredibly subversive message have ever actually reached the average mainstream listener?
The historical consensus is, honestly, no, it wouldn't have. Wallace's mix was the critical catalyst. It was the Trojan horse.
Wow, Trojan horse. I like that.
Top 40 commercial rock radio in the early 90s was highly sanitized. If you handed them a raw, muddy punk record, they simply wouldn't play it. Wallace wrapped this incredibly abrasive, alienated punk energy in a shiny, easily digestible sonic package.
Which sets up this wild, almost hilarious dynamic. The audio was perfectly polished and gift-wrapped for the masses, but when MTV came calling for a music video, Cobain used the lyrics and the visuals to actively mock the very audience that was preparing to consume it.
Yes. If you analyze the lyrics, Cobain completely eschews a traditional linear storytelling narrative. Instead, he uses a Dadaist collage of phonetic assaults, lines like, a mulatto, an albino, a mosquito, my libido. He isn't trying to tell you a story about a breakup or a fast car. It is a rhythmic expression of somatic self-loathing.
Yeah, that's visceral.
He's weaponizing the English language as a sensory assault, choosing words for how abrasive they sound rather than what they literally mean.
And he layers it with so much sarcastic compliance, too. Like the pre-chorus is, hello, 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 hello. It structurally functions like a friendly pop greeting, but it's really a measurement of degradation.
Oh, completely.
And then, of course, the ultimate cynical sigh of Generation X. Here we are now, entertain us. Which apparently was literally what he used to say when walking into boring parties in Olympia.
It was his catchphrase.
And if you've ever sat in a sterile corporate meeting or found yourself scrolling endlessly through perfectly curated social media feeds, feeling completely detached and exhausted, you know exactly the kind of fatigue Cobain was singing about.
It translates perfectly to today.
It does. That isn't just a 90s catchphrase. It's the exact same modern fatigue we feel today when faced with endless, meaningless content.
It was a razor-sharp critique of mass consumer expectations, and that critique was brought to visual life brilliantly by the music video.
Right, the legendary video shoot.
Shot in Culver City on a relatively modest $33,000 budget, they intentionally hired Samuel Bayer, a very green director, with a gritty, unpolished reel.
They wanted it to look a little ugly.
Exactly. Cobain explicitly wanted something that didn't look like a slick, corporate MTV product. The visual details were deeply subversive. The cheerleaders weren't typical smiling high school extras. They were recruited from local strip clubs and wore the anarchist A symbol patched onto their uniforms.
I love that detail.
And the janitor dancing with the mop in the background, he was a real custodian recruited from the director's apartment complex.
That is amazing. But the shoot itself was legendary for how utterly chaotic it got. It was a grueling 12-hour day. They recruited the audience by literally handing out flyers at the Roxy Club in Los Angeles. So you have these actual hardcore music fans, and they forced these kids to sit on hard wooden bleachers for 12 straight hours listening to this one track on repeat while the cameras rolled.
Can you imagine? And Bayer, the director, was acting as a strict disciplinarian.
Oh, making it worse.
He was screaming at them through a megaphone, demanding they sit still and look bored for the earlier takes, which just built up this massive, genuine frustration among the extras.
So we talk about this era being completely defined by apathy, like the slacker generation.
Right, that's the stereotype.
But when Bayer finally let those kids out of the bleachers for the climax of the video, they completely destroyed the set. They rushed the stage, tore down the props, and actually smashed the band's real gear in a very real, completely unscripted riot.
It was totally real.
Doesn't that prove the youth weren't apathetic at all? They were just exhausted by the artifice of the 80s, and they were desperately waiting for permission to explode.
It's a phenomenal observation. They weren't passive. They were paralyzed by the expectations of the era. The song was simply the release valve.
Wow.
And what makes this so incredibly poetic is that the physical explosion of those teenagers on that MTV soundstage mirrored exactly what the song was about to do to the global music industry.
It was an absolute hostile takeover.
A takeover fueled by a massive, poorly timed technological shift.
Oh, the barcode thing.
Yes. Up until 1991, the Billboard charts were based on a manual reporting system. Retail record store clerks would literally just write down on a piece of paper what they thought was selling or what their managers told them to write down.
Which is insane to think about now.
It allowed for massive systemic bias. Record labels could easily inflate the numbers of their priority pop artists, and clerks frequently ignored or drastically underreported alternative, punk, and metal sales because they didn't take those genres seriously.
So you just brushed them off.
Right. But in 1991, the industry switched to SoundScan.
And SoundScan completely removed human bias. It used computerized barcode tracking right at the cash register. It was a technological truth serum.
That's a great way to describe it.
It's basically, before 1991, the charts were based on vibes and whatever the record executives wanted the teenagers at the mall to think was popular.
Precisely. And when that barcode data started rolling in, it was a total shock to the label executives.
I bet they panicked.
The hard math revealed that alternative rock was vastly, exponentially outselling the manufactured pop and hair metal that the major labels had been spending millions to push.
Which leads to one of the most culturally symbolic moments in all of music history. On January 11th, 1992, the album Nevermind hit #1 on the Billboard charts.
A historic day.
In doing so, it physically displaced Michael Jackson's album Dangerous from the #1 spot. Think about the gravity of that. You have the ultimate symbol of highly produced, corporate 1980s pop royalty being dethroned overnight by a raw, alternative punk band from the Pacific Northwest who literally recorded their album next to a cardboard box.
It's almost unbelievable.
It was the absolute overnight death knell for highly manufactured hair metal.
It was a complete paradigm shift, but, it was a shift that deeply traumatized Kurt Cobain.
Yeah, he hated it.
The massive commercialization of the track turned his own creation into an enemy. The capitalist system hadn't just absorbed his critique, it was paying him millions of dollars to perform it on demand.
It turned his genuine existential pain and punk ethos into a highly marketable commodity.
Exactly. And he actively resisted this, sometimes in incredibly uncomfortable, very public ways.
He definitely did.
There are two incredibly vivid, almost punishing examples of his resistance. The first was in November 1991 on the legendary British television program Top of the Pops.
Oh, this performance is iconic.
The show had a strict corporate rule that bands were not allowed to play live. They had to mime playing their instruments over a pre-recorded backing track. Cobain found this artifice deeply insulting. So the band went on live television and made a complete defiant mockery of it.
Yeah, they didn't even try to hide it.
Not at all. Novoselic and Grohl wildly exaggerated their movements, making zero effort to pretend they were actually playing the drums or the bass. Cobain stood stiff as a board, refusing to look at his guitar, moving his hands completely out of sync with the music.
He even sang the entire song in this bizarre, gothic, operatic baritone voice, intentionally butchering the melody.
It was so strange.
And he changed the opening lyrics from "load up on guns, bring your friends" to "load up on drugs, kill your friends," just staring dead-eyed into the camera at millions of viewers.
The second instance was even more extreme, showing his willingness to alienate his own fans. In October 1992, Nirvana played a massive stadium show in Buenos Aires, Argentina, to 50,000 fans.
50,000, wow.
Nirvana had handpicked an all-female queer punk band from Portland named Calamity Jane to open for them. The stadium crowd was incredibly hostile and abusive to the opening act.
That's awful.
They threw mud, rocks, and coins and shouted vile slurs until Calamity Jane eventually had to flee the stage in tears.
Which obviously infuriated Cobain, given his roots in the Olympia feminist scene.
He was beyond livid. He initially wanted to cancel the show entirely.
I don't blame him.
Right. But instead, he decided to walk out there and systematically punish 50,000 paying fans.
How did he do that?
Nirvana played obscure, abrasive, unlistenable noise jams all night, and his ultimate weapon of torture. Throughout the set, Cobain would continuously tease the iconic opening riff of "Smells Like Teen Spirit."
Oh, that is brutal.
He'd play those four massive parallel fifth chords, whip the stadium into an absolute frenzy of anticipation, and then abruptly stop, laugh at the crowd, and play a slow, obscure B-side instead.
Just to mess with them.
They refused to play the hit song at all. He used their own multi-platinum anthem as a weapon to torture their audience.
It's just wild. The song became a weapon against the very people who elevated it. So when we step back and look at this entire journey from a hungover morning in Olympia to a massive stadium in Argentina, it all circles back to that core paradox, doesn't it?
It really does. The song began as a sarcastic, deeply cynical critique of consumerism and apathy, but it was built on a literal misunderstanding about a mass-market consumer product.
Right.
It was designed to mock the establishment, but thanks to Butch Vig and Andy Wallace's brilliant audio engineering, it was perfectly engineered to conquer that very establishment.
And that brings us to one last mind-bending fact for you, the listener, to mull over as we wrap up this deep dive. Fast forward to the 21st century. Kurt Cobain's fiercely anti-corporate, anti-establishment legacy is now managed by a corporate LLC.
Which is an irony in itself.
Totally. In 2018, this corporate entity entered a multi-year, multi-million-dollar federal lawsuit against the luxury fashion brand Marc Jacobs. The goal of this lawsuit? To legally protect the copyright of the iconic Nirvana smiley face logo.
The one everyone knows.
You know, the one, the dead eyes, the tongue sticking out. The ultimate underground punk rebellion was ultimately absorbed, institutionalized, and defended in federal court by corporate lawyers just to protect its value as a trademark.
The cycle of capitalist realism is totally complete. The rebellion itself has just become the commodity.
It really makes you wonder what else we're consuming today that started out as just a sarcastic joke spray painted on a wall. If you like this episode, please like and subscribe.